Hello, everyone.
Sorry, we're a few minutes late. We're learning how to go live on Facebook through Zoom. So I think we've got it. And just one thing I'm going to say, my glasses just broke before we started this. So if I look a little strange, just so you know.
It happens.
So my name is Erica Ives, and I am the CEO here at Mindful Path, and we're a healing space where we offer a wide variety of mental health services by different types of treatment professionals. We have individual therapy, we have group therapy, we have case management, we have yoga, we have EMDR, we have breath work, we have Reiki.
Dietitian services.
Thank you. Okay. So that's a little about Mindful Path.
And I am Stephanie Gilbert. I'm the program director here at Mindful Path.
So today, Steph and I are here to talk to you all about mental health. We want to help you be able to identify potential mental health issues, struggles you may be experiencing right now. Of course, especially with COVID is, making those things worse for people. And then we want to give you some coping skills. And this is also part one, because we're going to be doing another follow-up with this, right? So I'm just going to start by explaining what mental health is, because I think this concept is used in ways where people are sort of left with not even knowing, which is understandable, right? Yeah. So first of all, mental health is something that everybody has. We all have mental health. And good mental health is about having productive activities. It's about having fulfilling relationships. It's about being able to adapt to change. It's also about being able to cope with adversity. And I want to preface this presentation today by saying, if you are experiencing a lot of the mental health symptoms that we talk about today, it is really important that you contact somebody who can help guide you, whether it be a therapist, going to your doctor, going to a psychiatrist, getting the support and help that you need. The other thing I wanted to say is having mental health struggles right now is to be expected. It's normal. There's nothing wrong with you. It's to be expected. And mental health symptoms lie on a continuum. So, Steph, you want to talk a little more about that?
Just to add on the continuum, it's use the word normal. It's normal for us to have some of these symptoms at different times. It doesn't mean that we necessarily need to put the diagnostic labels on them. As humans, we have some anxiety. We have days where we feel a little bit more depressed, but it doesn't mean, though, that it is maybe more of a clinical diagnosis.
Right.
So just to normalize the things we're talking about today, most, if not all of us, have had some of these symptoms.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. So why don't we start with, I'll talk a little bit about depression. The first thing I want to say about depression is we all have experiences where we feel somewhat depressed. And again, it lies on a continuum. But the difference is that people are usually able to get out of it. So when you get more stuck in it and you can't get out is really when it gets even a little bit more concerning. So some of the symptoms of depression include a loss of pleasure in activities that you used to enjoy, sleep disturbances, whether you are sleeping too much or you're not sleeping enough. Appetite changes. So whether you don't have an appetite or you're eating more than usual. Isolating, just really wanting to be by yourself, not wanting to connect with people, feeling sad, just like an overall sadness and crying sometimes.
Even hopeless.
Hopelessness. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. And those, of course, with really severe depression, we see, suicidal ideation. And of
Mhm.
course, if you're experiencing any
Mhm.
thoughts like that, you need to call the suicide hotline, and we will make sure that we get that up for you guys if needed.
Yeah.
Um,
Or 911. Yeah.
right, or 911.
Mhm.
So some of these symptoms, like, they make perfect sense to be experiencing. We're experiencing something that's completely out of the norm right now. None of us know how to navigate this.
Mm-mm.
We're all learning this together. Really, we're all learning this together. So it is expected that you're going to have some of these feelings,
And
negative cognitions.
sorry, just to
Yeah.
add, like, one, when you said isolation,
Mhm.
we are all,
Right.
or most all of us are, for our physical health, in more isolation right now. But then maybe pointing out too, there's the mental health ramifications. It might feel like depression,
Mhm.
and cause your depression maybe to grow, but it's not necessarily that you started out wanting to be isolated.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
And there's like a lot of things that we're sad about right now. We're sad about not being able to see the people we love.
Mhm.
We're sad about not being able to do the things that make us maybe really feel good, doing the things we love. So again, like, it's to be expected. It's all about the extent that you're experiencing these feelings. And are they interfering with your daily functioning, whether it be your personal functioning, your social functioning, your occupational functioning? So that's some of the ways that we determine the severity of your depression. There also is a lot of fear right now because we don't know what's next, right? Like, fear of, am I going to get this? Is somebody I love going to get this? Am I going to lose somebody? And that's another thing that's causing depression right now for people. Loss, losing loved ones, losing somebody having a friend who's lost somebody, having to caretake somebody you love. So these things can bring on feelings of depression, or feelings of like grief, traumatic sort of grief.
Yeah. No, that's a good point. And I think that even just watching the news, I mean, feelings of loss and of even, society as it once was.
Right. That's a loss.
And losing that sense of, you'll be safe if you go outside and go to the grocery store, is a type of loss.
The other thing I think about is like students right now who don't get to graduate. I mean, they may graduate, but they don't get to be in their formal graduations. That can bring up a lot of sadness, and feelings of helplessness and all of the things that we talked about. So that's just a little bit of an explanation about depression. And Stephanie's going to talk a little bit about anxiety.
Sure. So I will preface this by saying a lot of the things about depression also apply when we're talking about anxiety. So the fact that we have lost a lot of things that we once had, for instance, can trigger in some people feelings of anxiety. I look at anxiety as kind of like two sides of the same coin.
Right.
So if you're maybe exhibiting some anxiety symptoms, for instance, you might be feeling it in your body. More somatic symptoms, like your heart might feel like it's racing. You might feel a little bit sweaty. You might get flushed. Those kind of things that we would maybe associate more with like panic symptoms, I think.
They're also like tingling, or like a numbness, or headaches, or
stomach aches.
That's what I was just going to say. Gastrointestinal stuff, diarrhea, constipation. All these things are affected. Dry mouth.
Absolutely. And as you can affect what you said about depression, in that it can affect sleep, it can affect appetite, so can anxiety. So you might find that you're, sleeping less, because another symptom is also ruminating thoughts. So ruminating thoughts, just imagine like a hamster on a wheel, like you really can't let go of a thought that is causing you to feel maybe more of those anxiety symptoms.
Yeah.
Appetite, you might not be so hungry if your
Right.
stomach hurts and you're feeling, in that kind of panicky state. Also pointing out too, what's happening with COVID. On one hand, it makes complete sense too, if we're feeling a little bit anxious, you're going outside with people who are wearing masks. We're not really in close contact with each other. Where the news, when you're watching the news, we're talking about germs and how we get infected and fill in the blank from there. So it's really also just to normalize the anxiety symptoms. It makes sense why we'd be feeling a little bit more anxious. I think it also goes to what Erica said about the level of anxiety. If it's affecting your day-to-day functioning, I would say, definitely reach out to either your mental health care provider or a mental health care provider.
Yeah, and the other thing is we can always help people with referrals in their area if you need that. And can I just elaborate on that?
Sure.
I mean, you talked about this, but that anxiety is like really, you talk about ruminating thoughts, excessive worry.
Yeah.
Just like like you were saying, you're fixated. I love your example about like the hamster on the wheel. And so again, like it's to be expected to be anxious because we don't know what's on the other side. So it's scary. And again, it's to the extent and how it interferes in your daily functioning.
And that's a good point too. The fear of the unknown, I think for a lot of people is extremely anxiety provoking.
Right. Yeah.
Because try as we might, we can't necessarily solve everything or plan ahead to where we once were. So that in of itself can lead to excessive worry.
Right.
Yeah.
And we're also I'm going to talk a little bit about trauma today. And Steph's also going to talk about OCD and maybe next time I don't know if we'll have time today to talk about eating disorders, but if not, we'll get to those next week. But those are the ones we will talk about. So trauma is a response to something that's really outside of the norm, whether it be witnessing something traumatic, whether it be hearing about something traumatic, so it's really about like these overwhelming experiences, and they can have a profound effect on our nervous systems. So some of the symptoms that go along with trauma include negative alterations in your cognition and your mood, maybe having like flashbacks about something that's occurred or something that you saw on TV or something you saw or had an experience out in the world. I do want to just back up and say some of these things are going to be worse if you have already experienced trauma and are suffering with it, or if you have been struggling with anxiety, or if you have been struggling with depression. But to go back, some of the other symptoms that you might feel, you might have nightmares, difficulty sleeping, feelings of like derealization or depersonalization, almost like you're not here, like this loss of sort of space and time. You might be really hyper vigilant, like really extra sensitive and an exaggerated startle response. So like finding yourself just, a little bit more jumpy. That could be an experience that you would have with trauma.
And I would think that would also speak to like feeling maybe like a chronic sense of not feeling safe.
Right. That's one of the hugest pieces that goes along with trauma is you don't feel safe. You don't, you have experiences where you don't feel physically safe. Maybe you don't feel emotionally safe or psychologically safe. And again, like I could talk about trauma pretty extensively, but for sake of time right now, I'm just going to share a little piece, but we'll elaborate on that for sure next week, because COVID is a trauma.
Yeah.
It is a global trauma. And again, like you put all this together, we don't know what's on the other side. And people are going to experience, especially our healthcare workers, what they have seen, what they have heard, what they have done, like that stuff weighs on you. With trauma, I like to say it leaves issues in our tissues. And so it can get stuck in our bodies and manifest in a lot of different ways. So again, it's like those feelings of overwhelm, exaggerated startle response, hypervigilance, derealization, depersonalization, negative alterations in your cognition, mood,
nightmares.
Yeah.
Some of the same appetite. You can have appetite changes.
Avoidance. That's a good, huge one. And that will lead right into what you're going to talk about, because avoidance is one of the big ways that we deal with trauma. We deal with it by either fight, flight, or freeze, which is just like an immobilization where we sort of collapse. And so avoidance is a really, really big part of trauma. And so are like intrusive memories and that sort of thing. So maybe you can elaborate on that when you talk about OCD.
Sure, I can. And I think just one more I wanted to add about trauma. I'm glad you're talking about it next week, because I'm going to imagine that the coping strategies you would share for trauma while you're going through an experience would be different than the coping strategies once the trauma is finished.
Yeah, they do blend together though a lot, but that most definitely.
Because this would be an ongoing trauma. Yeah,
for sure. Yes.
You mentioned the intrusive thought, so I was going to share briefly about OCD, which is an obsessive compulsive disorder. And for those of you who are unfamiliar, it is a disorder that is comprised over or up of obsessions. So you can imagine those as those like ruminating thoughts, but ruminating thoughts times maybe 100. And then compulsions. So the person might be doing something repetitively, checking, hand washing, those types of things. It's a very brief overview.
So obsessions are the thoughts and compulsions are the act, right?
Yes. Yeah. And someone who will need both of them to have that diagnosis. Within that, though, is what we would think of as like a fear of going outside. We would call that agoraphobia. That is coming, I feel like, into the conversation a little bit more with COVID, because we are experiencing a trauma that there's a lot of fear of coronavirus, for lack of,
fear goes along so much with trauma too. Sorry.
I feel like they overlap.
There's so much overlap with all of these. And a lot of times they occur together.
Yes. But with OCD right now, people who are maybe have suffered in the past with obsessive thoughts and compulsions, or maybe this is the first time you're experiencing this, COVID is very similar, or the precautions we're taking for COVID, very similar as someone who would have fears of germs with OCD.
Right.
We are doing some of the same behaviors that you might see with someone who's suffering from OCD. So compulsive hand washing, wearing a mask, fear of touching other people for the avoidance of getting a particular illness. Feeling really unsafe is also a symptom of OCD. The hypervigilance comes out with the checking and the compulsive things. They with this disorder, though, too, you might see the person doing these for multiple hours a day.
Right.
So when you're talking about really affecting daily life, this person might feel stuck in a compulsion of hand washing.
Right.
And no matter how much they hand wash, they can't they can't get that 100% guarantee that they're not going to get coronavirus. So just knowing right now that the media and the pandemic is triggering those kind of anxious thoughts for people who are prone to it, knowing that if it's the first time you're starting to suffer from these symptoms, go to a mental health professional and talk about it. There are treatments out there for it. And some of this is also, how would I say, like a necessary evil in the fact that we need to, you can't swing the other way.
No.
We do need to hand wash. We do need to be careful.
That's right.
A treatment for OCD, just briefly, is exposure therapy and is really meant to help someone face their fears. But when you're talking about going up a pandemic, it's not necessarily the time to face the fear of like not washing your hands.
Right.
So there's kind of an issue there for somebody who's trying to cope alone.
Right.
They really need the help of a professional.
The compulsion is about trying to relieve the ruminating thoughts, right? And like I was also thinking about it with like cleaning, disinfecting. So it's almost like you were saying, the necessary
evil.
Right. It's so confusing because like we need to do those things. Just I know you already said this, but it just really resonates because that's so scary for people. But it is about being cognizant and understanding when it's going to a place where it's taking up a lot of your time. It's affecting your relationships and your ability to be present with people, and you're just like consumed, right? As with all these things.
Yes. And with OCD, there's a stigma with all disorders, but I find a lot of times with people who are suffering from OCD, they know that the actions don't necessarily correlate to the worries. So that's kind of a hallmark. If you're looking at someone who maybe is hand washing after they get out or they get home from the grocery store and they're washing their hands once or twice, that's not necessarily a compulsion. But if you're, someone who's at home and ruminating on safety and then feels the need to go hand wash out of the blue and is stuck there for maybe 30 to 40 minutes, that's what we would talk about as a compulsive behavior. The worries and the actions don't necessarily fit together.
Right.
So try as they might, they're trying to make themselves feel better by doing an action that's not going to have the result that they're seeking.
Right.
Which often leads to frustration for the individual too.
Most definitely. And we see that a lot in our offices. So, we can take any questions on any of the things we talked about.
There is actually one.
Okay.
And I think this one would be good. It speaks to, I think we got it when you were talking about depression. Will asks, how do you suggest people remain hopeful instead of hopeless in this current situation?
Oh, that is such a good question.
It is a good question.
Oh my. So I think you really need to be able to separate things out a little bit instead of looking at it sort of in its entirety, because I think in its entirety, this whole thing can really leave you feeling hopeless. However, if you can break it down into different areas, like in regards to your close relationships, maybe reflecting on something positive that happened, or having an experience with a friend or a loved one, simply connecting. Connecting is so important. That can help you to feel hopeful. Maybe, again, you're feeling hopeless, but you go outside, and because we can do that more now, and you connect with nature. And maybe that's something that brings you more hope. Maybe prayer is something that brings you more hope. Doing rituals that make you feel good. Do you want to speak to that too?
One thing that I talk about as a therapist some is how we're defining hopeful. So if you can imagine like the positive psychology, more Instagram posts of like everything is going to be okay. The reality is a little bit different though. So how to maintain hope, also feel like though that you believe that hope,
Right.
I think is really important. So connecting with loved ones, just like what you said, like everything you said was our phenomenal skills.
I just think breaking it down,
Yeah.
because it's too much in its entirety.
Then it gets overwhelming.
Yeah, for all of us, right? Yeah, and so like thinking about things that bring you joy, and people and loved ones and activities you like to do, and that sort of thing. And I'm going to say another thing is, you know, all this, I know, as much as it may not feel like it right now, it's at some point going to end.
Yeah.
Like that's another thing. Instead of, focusing, like looking, oh, I have one, looking at how our restrictions have begun to be lifted a little bit. And even that is bringing a little bit more hope, right?
Even going outside, one thing for me is going outside and say I'm crossing the street and I make eye contact with the driver,
Right.
and we smile and like like knowing that there are still people out there.
Right.
We're all still here, so to speak. We're just a little bit more isolated.
Right.
So that for me at least makes me feel a little bit more hopeful that
Right.
that community is still there.
Right.
It just looks a little different right now.
Do we have any others?
We do. So Michaela asks, how do you determine the line between being safe with health during COVID and being overly anxious about it?
Well, I think that goes, we'll both speak to this. I think this goes to what we've been talking about, is looking at the amount of time this is taking up for you, and looking, anxiety, and looking at like, is it taking you out of your ability to be present and engaged? Are you finding that you're more withdrawn and not wanting to connect? Are you finding like it's affecting, if you're working now, like your work productivity, your school performance? Those would be some indicators that maybe there's something that we need to, or you need to, take care of a little bit better. So it's not an indication like that something's wrong with you, or that you have an anxiety disorder. I just want to say that again. It just means maybe you're struggling a little bit more right now, and that's to be expected. And the other thing is, it gives you information that you need to engage in self-care. So like that, you get that anxiety, you feel in your body, because with all these, we feel them in our bodies. And so when that happens, it's like, oh my gosh, this is an indication that I have to go do something that helps ground me, instead of like staying in it and spiraling in it, letting it communicate what you need.
I think that's perfect.
Yeah. Okay.
I also add to, for people who maybe have struggled with anxiety, I ask them to kind of observe themselves in their actions, and from an objective standpoint. And often I do this as a therapist, like observing and seeing why they're doing what they're doing.
Right.
So are the actions they're taking, is it serving a purpose for your health? Or are you looking for something else in that moment, like a feeling of reassurance?
That's a great point.
That's something I didn't mention with OCD, but reassurance seeking is a symptom too. So if you're looking for something else, that speaks to a greater need, and how can we find that versus being stuck in the anxiety?
Right. I hope we answered that question. If we didn't, just, let us know right now, and that you might need a little bit more, and we're more than happy to expand on our answers. Do we have any more?
No, I think those are all the questions, but we might talk a little bit about coping.
Yes.
We have about 10 minutes left.
Yes. Okay. I'm gonna talk about grounding, because I think that so many of us are having that experience where we just like don't feel presence, or we feel, like I said, that experience of overwhelm or debilitating fear. And so one of the things we want to do is work on getting back into our body and back into our physical space, if you will. And some of the ways that we do that are by simply like maybe looking around the room and naming colors that you see. Like, I see a blue folder, I see a lamp that has a green base and an ivory shade. Maybe it might also be like sounds, like hear my be so like me.
Maybe feelings.
My water. Another grounding thing might be like and feeling the water go down. I have water dripping down my chin.
That's all right.
Another thing is like putting your feet on the ground and stomping your feet and getting grounded, getting like rooted. Putting your hands on the chair, feeling material, saying out loud like what it is you're feeling on the chair, the material. So yeah, grounding exercises, which are really when you're just feeling off. And gets you back into the here and now. And of course, like breathing is a huge part of that too.
And the great thing about those skills is you can do them anywhere.
Right. A great one, and I'll show it, actually demonstrate it next week, is like standing against the wall, because that helps you to know like you have something protecting you, kind of can create a feeling of safety, because that's another thing that we want to do is we want to try and engage in something that makes us feel safe, right? Something where we haven't had trauma. Some people like to take a bath. Some people like to drink a cup of tea. Oh, I do have to say one.
Go ahead,
because it's such an important one.
Yeah.
Singing.
Yeah.
Singing. Oh my gosh. It has amazing benefits. And it makes you feel good, and it releases oxytocin. And listening to music, not music if you're feeling sad, that's going to make you feel more sad. It's about feeling music, that's going to make you feel good. And maybe even getting up and dancing and moving your body. Yeah.
I was going to add to one that's become popular lately are the weighted blankets.
Oh, and we love weighted blankets and mindful path.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So, and I want you talk more about the grounding for the body. I might talk a little bit about coping with the negative thoughts.
Okay.
So one really good tool to start with, if you're trying to, for the first time, maybe sort of what we would call is challenge the negative thoughts and then reframe, or that's a therapist word for replace those thoughts with something a little bit more positive. You can simply write them down.
Yeah.
It's actually amazing how many thoughts we have. I mean, we're thinking almost 24 hours a day.
Right.
And we don't necessarily notice when the thoughts have become more negative because we're so used to our own thoughts.
Right.
So if you just maybe take 2 minutes and sit down and think, okay, I'm going to write every thought down I can think that I've had today. And if you're noticing they're trending more maybe negative, or they're trending more maybe in the depression realm and they're sad, or maybe it's centered around feeling unsafe and anxiety. And then if you make a column of those thoughts, then maybe next to it, write a thought. It might feel a little bit forced at the beginning, but write a thought that you could maybe change that into.
Right.
Not necessarily everything's going to be great and it's super positive today.
No, be realistic.
Be realistic, and writing them down, keeping them in front of you, maybe put them on the refrigerator so that then you can start to integrate them into your thought patterns. It takes some time, but it's really beneficial.
I want to say that you have a couple of videos on CBT that are on our website under the interview tab. There's either, I think it's under the live, or it might be under the social media or the other one. But there we have some videos on this too.
And I wrote it on a board. So I gave you, if you want to look at that and do the.
I think we had another question.
One more question. So this is a big question. So Jackson asks, Have you two learned anything new about yourselves or about mental health as a whole during this quarantine?
Oh my gosh, Jackson, that is a really profound question, if I do say so myself. Yes, I'll go first.
Okay.
I think probably one of the biggest things for me that I have been really cognizant about and practicing is patience. Um, and like this ability to be able to just get myself calmer, because we're so on the go all the time. I know I'm so on the go all the time, and so like getting the time to sort of sit back and reflect. At first it caused me immense anxiety, I'm not gonna lie. It was so overwhelming. I had my own experience with it, which was really hard, but through this, like, I think I've just gotten calmer in my own skin and in my own body and in my mind and in my heart. And yeah, that's one of the biggest things for me.
That's big. Okay, for me, you mentioned patience. I think this has been a huge lesson in flexibility for me. I'm someone who really likes to know what's going to happen like 3 days before. And I just don't have that right now. And the fact that I can sit here and say, well, that's okay. Because it's not about the perfection of, what we're doing 2 weeks from now.
Right.
But I don't think I've ever had an experience where like coping and like recognizing you're coping and validating that, at least for myself, like, okay, I'm doing okay. I can maintain this,
Right.
is hugely significant for me. And then I think it allows me to be more compassionate, to sit with people and talk about mental health issues. And then just to briefly talk about mental health as a whole, I think I've always thought that it was important, but now I think it's imperative for everyone.
Taking care of your mental health. Right. And the other thing is, I think people are really starting to understand that more, which is so important. So yeah, those would be a couple of the lessons we've learned.
And I think that not only have we learned it, but even starting something like this and starting a conversation on Facebook,
so
I don't know if we would have done that.
No, and like the classes we're offering online now. I had never even done a telehealth session before. I'm not going to lie. I've always done my sessions in person. And at first I had so much anxiety about it, just everything about it. And now, again, like you talked about, that flexibility. I teach at a university and we're online right now. And I have never done that before. In one of my classes, I have like 23 students and seeing them all in Zoom. At first, I was like, oh my gosh, everything's going to go wrong, all those negative thoughts. And I had to sit and get patient and challenge and say, it might take some time. And that's okay. Like, that's okay.
And I've learned if it does go wrong, that's okay too.
Yeah.
We're all human.
Right.
I've never thought that I would lead groups online before this.
Right.
And it's actually a really cool experience.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. We'll be continuing to do it.
So it allows people to access care too.
Oh, so much easier. That's right. It's for a lot of people. That's so true. And, I want to say again, to remind you all that mental health is something we all have. And I just want to preface again what it is, because I said it at the beginning in case any of you missed it. Good mental health is about having like productive activities. It's about having fulfilling relationships. It's about learning how to cope with adversity. It's about adapting to change. And so that's what we work to be able to do and do those things better and have those things. And that will help us to improve our mental health.
Absolutely.
You know, I would love, because these threads keep going. So if any of you want to put like what you've been doing to take care of your mental health, that would be so helpful, because, you know, what we say may not resonate with somebody, but what you say might. And so I think it's so important to remember, like, we all have a voice, and more than ever, I think people are listening. So use your voice and use your presence and engage others and talk to others and be kind to yourself and be compassionate with yourself. And I think on that note, unless we have any other questions.
No, I think that's
Thank you all so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
We'll be back for part 2 of this next week, where we're going to talk more about this, like, on what to expect as we continue to move on with your mental health, and more tips on how to take care of your mental health. So
thank you.
Thank you all. Stay safe, stay well, and have a beautiful day. And we're here in California, so our beaches just opened today. So, you know, jumping in the water, taking a walk on the beach. I'm really happy about that. That's one of my greatest coping skills. So anyway, so take care of yourself, and we will see you soon.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.